year was 1878. The West was a land half-built, half-broken, where towns rose from dust as fast as they fell back into it, where men carried both law and chaos on their hips, and where storms could swallow the horizon in the blink of an eye. On one such day, the sun disappeared. A crimson wall of sand rolled out of the high desert, swallowing Dust Valley whole. It came with a roar that sounded too much like rage to be just wind. Daylight vanished under the red shroud, turning the sun into a bleeding coin behind the haze. Horses screamed in their stalls. The church bell swung itself hoarse before falling silent, its last cry choked by the grit in the air. Houses trembled as if some invisible giant leaned against them. Dust poured under doors, filled coffee cups, rattled window shutters like dice in a gambler's palm. The street vanished beneath it, and so did the people, slamming doors against the storm while praying the nails held. Out in that wall of wind and sand, something moved. At first, it was only a shape, barely human, staggering forward while the storm tore at it like wolves on a carcass. Then, as lightning stitched the sky open for a split second, the shape became a girl, a woman. Though thin as famine and younger than her eyes would admit, she braced against the gusts with a kind of stubbornness that looked too small to survive. One arm shielding her face, the other clutching something tight against her chest. Alina Skye. Later, Dust Valley would argue about where she came from. Some said she was the last Apache left after the army cleared the mesas. Others claimed she belonged to no tribe at all, that she had simply walked out of the desert like a ghost the earth had coughed up. But on that day, she was just a figure in the storm, staggering toward a town too scared to open its doors. Jacob Reed watched her from the edge of the livery. He was a broad-shouldered man with the kind of stillness that made people nervous, as if he were listening to things they couldn't hear. His horse stood saddled beside him, restless but obedient, nostrils flaring at the sandstorm's smell. Jacob didn't know why he didn't go inside like everyone else. Maybe it was the way she kept moving forward when the wind itself seemed to want her gone. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes when she finally stumbled close enough for him to see them, a look like someone who had already lost too much to be afraid of losing more. When she collapsed 10 yards from the trough, Jacob moved. He crossed the street under a rain of red sand, boots grinding grit, and lifted her like she weighed nothing. The storm took its time dying. By the next morning, Dust Valley looked less like a town and more like the memory of one, half buried under drifts of crimson grit. The church bell hung mute. The saloon doors leaned off their hinges, and the people came out squinting, like survivors of some biblical judgment. That was when they saw Jacob carrying her through the square. She was wrapped in his coat, face pale against the black wool, lips cracked, hair full of dust. Someone muttered the word Apache, half warning, half curse. Jacob didn't slow. He carried her into the small doctor's shack near the edge of town, kicked the door shut behind him, and when the old man inside started to speak, Jacob cut him off with a look. "Water," he said. The girl didn't wake for hours. When she finally did, the first thing she saw was the ceiling beam above the cot, split down its length, like lightning had lived there once. The second thing she saw was Jacob, sitting in the corner with his hat on his knee, watching her with the same steady silence he'd carried her in with. She tried to sit up. Pain stopped her halfway, the kind that blooms from too many miles without food or water. Jacob poured her a tin cup and held it out. She drank like someone not sure there'd be a second chance. "Name's Jacob Reed," he said finally. She hesitated, then said, "Alina." Her voice was rough, but there was a steadiness in it, like someone used to saying her own name to strangers who might not be friends. "Where are you headed?" Jacob asked. She shook her head. Not because she didn't know, but because maybe she didn't want to say. By evening, the town had decided it didn't like her. They didn't say it outright, not yet. But Jacob felt it in the way conversations stopped when he walked into the saloon for supplies. In the way eyes slid toward the window where she sat on the porch drinking broth from a tin cup. Apache or not, she was a stranger. And Dust Valley didn't like strangers unless they had money or stayed quiet long enough to fade into the background. Jacob wasn't sure which one she planned on being. When he came out of the saloon, she was watching the sunset like it might tell her something. The storm had left the sky scrubbed clean, the kind of fierce orange that looked like the world on fire. "You got people out there?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Not anymore. That was all she said, but it was enough. Jacob nodded toward his horse. "Come on," he said. "Town's not gonna get friendlier." She hesitated, then followed. Maybe she didn't have anywhere else to go. Or maybe she'd seen something in Jacob's face that said he wouldn't ask more questions than she could afford to answer. Either way, by the time night came down full and the coyotes started singing to the moon, they were miles out of Dust Valley. A lantern swinging from Jacob's saddle horn, two figures riding toward the dark line of hills where his cabin waited like a secret. Jacob's cabin sat near the tree line where the desert ended, and the hills began a single room with a porch, big enough for 2 chairs and a view that went on forever. The storm had left the air scrubbed clean, the stars sharp enough to cut yourself on. Alina sat on the porch steps that first night, wrapped in Jacob's old blanket. He lit a lamp inside, the warm glow spilling out like the house itself was trying to make up for its plainness. "You can stay," he said simply. "As long as you need. Car." She didn't answer right away. She kept watching the sky as if looking for a sign, or maybe for ghosts. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, careful. "Why?" Jacob leaned against the door frame. "Storm would have killed you. Didn't feel like letting that happen." It wasn't charity in his tone, and it wasn't pity. It was just fact, offered plain as water. Alina nodded once, slow. She didn't say thank you, and he didn't expect her to. Morning brought silence broken only by birdsong and the thud of Jacob splitting wood out back. Alina found coffee on the table, still warm, and a note beside it in Jacob's rough hand. "Help yourself. I'll be in the pasture." The cabin smelled of pine smoke and iron from the tools lined neat along one wall. There was a bed, a stove, a shelf with 3 books worn soft from use. The kind of life built by a man who asked for little except enough space to breathe. Alina stepped outside, the blanket still around her shoulders. Jacob was by the fence line, shirt sleeves rolled, muscles in his forearms moving like someone who didn't know what it was to quit halfway. He glanced up once, nodded, then went back to work. For days, they moved around each other like two people figuring out a language without words. Alina mended the torn strap on his saddle without being asked. Jacob fixed the cabin door when it started to sag. She cooked beans one night. He brought in fresh water the next. It was a rhythm with no name yet, but it held. One evening, Jacob found her sitting on the fence, watching the sun bleed itself out behind the hills. "Town's still talking," he said, leaning against the post beside her. "About me? About us?" he corrected. "You being here, me bringing you." Alina's jaw tightened. "They think you should have left me there." "They think a lot of things," Jacob said, "most of them not worth repeating." She studied his face in the fading light. "And what do you think?" Jacob looked out at the horizon a long time before answering. "I think storms don't bring people together for no reason," he said. The wind moved through the grass below like something alive. Alina didn't reply, but for the first time since the storm, her shoulders eased just a little. But Dust Valley wasn't the kind of place to leave people alone for long. Silas Crow heard soon enough that Jacob Reed had brought someone back from the storm. Silas owned half the saloon, most of the lawmen, and all the fear in town. He didn't like surprises he hadn't ordered. "Apache girl," one of his men said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "Staying out at Reed's place." Silas leaned back in his chair, smile thin as a razor. "That's so?" The man nodded. Silas drummed his fingers once on the table, then stood. "Let's go pay our respects," he said. Dust Valley's nights were usually quiet wind, whispering through dry grass. Coyotes calling far off, but that night, a new kind of tension settled over the land. Jacob felt it before he heard the horses. He had been stacking wood by lamplight when 4 riders appeared at the edge of his fence line, silhouettes cut out of the moonlight. Silas Crow rode at the front, coat black as the space between stars. His smile the kind men got before they burned things down. "Evening, Reed," he drawled. "Heard you've taken in some company." Alina stepped into the doorway, the lamplight framing her like a painting. She didn't flinch, but her hands tightened in the blanket she wore. "Storm almost killed her," Jacob said flatly. "She's staying here. That's all." Silas tipped his hat, eyes sliding over Alina like she was something he could buy, like the land and the law and half the people in town. "That all, huh?" he said. "Funny thing, folks in town are curious. Some of them worried. Apache girl shows up after a storm. Next thing you know, fences break, cattle go missing. People start wondering if maybe trouble blew in with her." Jacob stepped forward, shoulders broad enough to block the lamplight. "You came out here to gossip, Crow?" The men behind Silas shifted in their saddles, hands near pistols. Silas chuckled, low and easy. "Number, I came out here to offer advice. Dust Valley's a small place. Strays bring wolves. Sometimes better to send them back where they came from." Jacob's voice was calm, but there was iron under it. "She's not going anywhere." The smile faded from Silas's face like a lamp snuffed out. He leaned forward in the saddle. "Then neither is this." He pointed at the ground between them. "Line in the dirt, Reed. You crossed it tonight. Don't be surprised when the desert comes calling." They rode off, dust curling behind them like the tail of some dark comet. Later, inside the cabin, Alina sat at the table, the lamplight soft on her face. "You knew him," she said, quietly. Jacob poured coffee into 2 tin cups. His hands were steady, but his jaw wasn't. "Men like Crow," he said, "you don't have to know them. You just feel them coming, like thunder before a storm." Alina looked at him a long time. "Why's he afraid of you?" Jacob set the pot down, metal against wood. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until it felt like another person in the room. "Because of who I used to be," he said finally. "Before this place, before I put the gun down." Alina waited. "They called me Jacob the Quick," he said. "Fastest draw from here to Abilene. I wasn't proud of it then, and I'm sure as hell not proud now. Left a trail behind me long as this valley." Alina's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "And Crow knows men like me don't stay buried forever," Jacob said. He looked at his hands, the calluses from years at the forge trying hard to cover the scars left by years of something else. "Knows every man's got a line. Cross it, and the old ghosts wake up." He looked at her then, steady, like he wanted her to understand something. Crow's riding straight for that line. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls, rattling them like dice in a cup. And somewhere beyond the dark hills, the desert was already gathering its wolves. The desert wind howled through the canyon like a pack of wolves hunting in the dark. Jacob Reed rode in slow, his horse kicking up trails of dust behind him. Torches burned along the cliffs, casting long, trembling shadows over the rough faces of Marcus Kane's men. And there she was, Alina Skye tied to a post in the center of it all, her hair wild in the wind, blood dried along her cheek, eyes locked on the darkness where she prayed he would appear. Marcus Kane stood off to the side, his long black coat snapping in the wind, a cruel smile curling across his face. The flames glinted off the polished barrel of the pistol at his hip. "Tomorrow," he announced loud enough for the whole canyon to hear, "I marry her right here. And you, Reed, you'll be lying in the dirt where you belong." The words had barely left his mouth when the wind carried the pounding of hooves across the hard ground. Jacob emerged from the shadows, tall in the saddle, his eyes like twin shards of ice under the brim of his hat. "Let her go," Jacob said, voice calm, heavy with promise. Marcus smirked. "Glad you came. Saves me the trouble of dragging you here myself." He lifted a hand. His men reached for their guns. The first shot cracked like thunder. Chaos exploded. Muzzle flashes lit the canyon walls in rapid bursts as gunfire tore through the night. Jacob moved fast, a blur of dust and lead, dropping Kane's men one by one with deadly precision. The air burned with the stench of gunpowder. Marcus stepped back, fury twisting across his face as he pulled his silver-plated revolver. "Reed," he bellowed over the gunfire. "This ends tonight." When the last of his men fell silent in the dust, it was just the two of them, Marcus Kane and Jacob Reed, standing beneath the blood-red moon. Marcus grinned, feral and bitter. "You should have stayed dead, Reed." Jacob leveled his gun, eyes like iron. "I was dead until her. The final shots came quick, 2 cracks splitting the air apart. When the smoke cleared, Marcus Kane lay sprawled in the dust, his pistol inches from his hand, his reign over Dust Valley finished. Jacob's revolver slipped from his fingers. He ran to Alina, cutting her free. She fell into his arms, shaking, tears streaking her face. "You came," she whispered. "I'll always come," he murmured back, his voice rough but steady. But as dawn crept over the canyon walls, Jacob knew this wasn't over. News of Marcus Kane's death would spread fast. Men worse than him would come hunting for revenge. Jacob stared toward the horizon, jaw tight. "We have to move, Alina," he said. "This fight, it's just getting started." The wind rose again, carrying with it the promise of more blood and more battles yet to come. And as the screen fades, the story leaves the door wide open, because out here in the Wild West, no ending ever stays an ending for long.